Welcome back. We continue with the news review right here on Citizen TV. This is Daybreak. I'm here with Jared Okello and Pinyando and Irungu Kangata, Senator Muranga, also the Deputy Majority Whip in the Senate. And I want to look at this headline on the front page of the Standard, why Kenya is damned over IMF ultimatum. A lot has been said about the fuel crisis, which is ongoing, the imposition of 16% VAT on all petroleum products and the effects it has had on Kenyans and the economy in general. The president returned from a trip to China, I think the day before yesterday. Now he has 4 days left. Kenya faces a dilemma of yielding to public pressure on 16% fuel tax or sticking to lenders' 100 billion shilling deal. Of course, we've been discussing over and over the fact that we need to do away with this VAT. Even the MPs are unanimous that it cannot be applied at this time. In fact, the amendments is that it be postponed. But if you flip the coin, Kenya has commitments that it has already made to the Bretton Woods institution. You're talking about the IMF, and part of the commitment is to charge VAT on petroleum, which was to earn about 71 billion shillings, to remove cap on interest rates, which we have not done yet, to fight corruption and wastage in government offices, which we have not done yet, increase economic growth by 1.5 percentage points, which, well, we're struggling there, remove other tax exemptions such as on milk, maize, flour, kerosene, wheat flour, and pesticides. And if we fail to do this, we would be locked out of some guarantee, which would mean that even the kind of commitments we are in, some of the lenders can actually decide to call them back. And if you recall, a debt at this point, we might have to pay immediately, which we cannot afford. Yes? Now, that is the other side of the coin that we as Kenyans have not even started discussing. Yes? And that is the situation the president has. Do you think that the president, for him, it's just as easy as, well, signing the amendments as proposed by the National Assembly?
Firstly, we are not beholden to International Monetary Fund. We don't work for them, and we don't belong to them. The interest of the Kenyan people would always come first. All the others are secondary. But let's face the facts. We are here because of our penchant for loans. This is a country where every morning what the executive thinks is acquisition of loans and loan facilities from financial institutions, both locally and abroad. And by the way, out of our preference for loans has brought about the difficulties for private individuals like you and I and my brother Senator Kangata from accessing loans within banks here in Kenya, because they know that they have big assurance in the name of the Kenyan government. The government doesn't need any collateral. The name itself, government, is a collateral. And this is a government that would always borrow from morning to evening. So instead of banking on hopes that Indimuli will, once given some loans, will repay, they would apply brakes on you and give it to the government. So firstly, we have to address these issues of loans that the government is fond of.
We find ourselves already in this situation.
Inside that
We've already made commitments to the IMF.
In 2013, that is when that 100 billion precautionary credit facility was extended to us. And it was premised on certain fundamentals. Number one, that Kenya was going commercial exploration of oil. That was what I would call the collateral for that precautionary loan. And once Kenya was going into a commercial production of oil, prices were substantially going to come down. So even if you levy 16% additional tax on what has already come down, the effect was going to be quite minimal. Kenyans were not going to realize it. So that is why in 2013, when it ought to have started being an electioneering year, and during electioneering year, you don't come up with such adverse mechanisms. Otherwise, you will be shown the doors. And every candidate then wanted to protect his or her territory. So that, in the wisdom of the then parliament, they pushed it further by 3 more years. But then, unfortunately, it landed in 2016 when another electioneering year had already, all the hallmarks of an electioneering year had dawned. there was an election coming up in 2017. And of course, Jubilee had received all the swathes from would-be voters. So employing that strategy then in order to persuade IMF was going to be too expensive for them. So they pushed it further by additional 2 more years. And that is where we are today. Now, the 1st of September is when that loan or that facility ought to have been applied. And of course, it was
actually
applied.
Yes.
So what needed to happen is the finance bill that the parliament passed ought to have been done a little earlier, not at the tail end of that particular concession. So when that bill was passed by parliament, definitely it goes to State House for presidential assent. The president wasn't in the country. He was in China, negotiating for more loans. So what therefore happens? The law, as was passed 2 years ago, takes shape. And that is something that Kenyans don't understand. Until the president signs it to replace that particular bill, that 16% must be in place.
Do you see the president actually signing that bill to amend this because of the kind of situation we find ourselves in? And our biggest concern today is not even the effect of the VAT on Kenyans and the price of fuel. Is now on the fact that if we do not do this,
then there are repercussions.
Yes.
Well, 3 things that the president is likely to do. One, and I think this is most likely, but I don't want to talk for him because I'm not his spokesperson, that he may bring it back to Parliament for certain amendments. He may not want us to scrap and move it to 2 years in its entirety, like 0-0, as it happens, as it happened 2013 to 2017. He may say then push it back to 12% or even 10%. Because still, as you correctly put it, we are in a quandary if we don't address this. So he may say, bring it back to Parliament with these recommendations. Number 2...
would a reduction of that nature be of any consequence? Would it be a proper relief for Kenyans? Reducing that 16% VAT to 12% maybe?
Definitely it is not. But again, you don't want to lose touch with IMF and other breasthood institutions. So you would rather just bring it down, renegotiate with them and say, then if we had to pay within this set period of time, let's extend the period but make a commitment that this is what we can present to you at the end of every year. Because you also understand that Eurobond 2 is beckoning. They want their monies back.
Yes.
So it is not just the precautionary credit facility. No, we also have Eurobond 1, Eurobond 2.
And without IMF, we're already high risk, so...
Yes, and you know there is classification by financial institutions. So once we drop so low, we will not be eligible to any kind of support from anywhere, including grants. Yes,
and that's a bit that Kenyans are yet to grasp. That yes, 16% VAT on petroleum products is a huge burden. It is not anything that we want, but on the flip side, if we do not do this, we will be in probably bigger problems.
Yes, it is true. You must also contextualize how IMF and the World Bank works. Remember, essentially these are institutions which are owned by United States. You know, United States is a wise superpower. They do not want to appear as punitive entities. So they create this institution as a decoy, as a small screen, to hide themselves behind entities whose interest or effect is to remake the world in their own interests. But essentially they are hiding themselves. So you not see America, but the truth is
it is them.
It is them.
UN.
It is them. So to me, I think we must understand from that context. Number 2, we must also understand that we are a poor country and therefore we require some assistance for us to be able to go forward. We require capital, we require credit facilities, and also we must also take up loans. Because without loans, surely, you cannot move forward. Vast majority of the people you see here who are rich in this country, they have been funded by various persons, isn't it? So therefore, a loan is an integral part of development. But so therefore, I would foresee our president making the wisest decision, which I agree, which is, 1, to negotiate with the National Assembly so that they come up with a compromise. And whatever compromise they may come, which may include, as my colleague has suggested, maybe you reduce from 16% to about 10%, then the president is going to take up that to those two institutions and tell them, no, Mr. IMF, I've only been able to procure this. For instance, if I can recall, the interest rates had two components. It had what is called a floor and a ceiling. Parliament refused to do away with the ceiling, but it agreed to do away with the floor, which is once you deposit your money, under the old law, you are supposed to earn a certain interest. That one was done away with. So currently, we only have a ceiling of 14% or what points above the so-called CBK rate, right? So, so in the same manner, we have not been able to fulfill one condition of IMF as per what they wanted. But at least we have been able to do 50% of that condition. So in the same manner, I also foresee Mr. Uhuru, the president, can as well go and tell yes on this one about VAT, National Assembly, which represents the sovereign will of the people, has said it can only give a rebate of about, let's say, 6% or let's say 8%. But for sure, they have refused to take away the entire thing.
Clearly, there is no let up for Kenyans. Kenyans will still have to pay up.
No, there is. I think also the president needs to consider other ways to bridge our budget. Because I think the whole problem comes out of the notion that our budget has a huge deficit. And there are other ways which are less harmful.
But that would mean renegotiating with the IMF to tell them that we have other options besides these ones prescribed to us by them, because these ones, I think, they have already been listed. VAT on petroleum, remove interest rate caps. Even if we come up with innovative ideas of how to raise money, the IMF is insistent on these things.
Of course, I can tell you IMF is comprised of very good economists. So if you give them other options, I am sure these conditions are not set on, they are not cast on stone. For instance, there is a report that was prepared by Mr. Abdikader when he was working in the State House, which he recommended, for instance, we do away with what are called superfluous parastatus, state corporations. There's a lot of duplication in our bureaucracy. For instance, we have things which are called Lake Victoria, Development Basin. That institution was rendered superfluous with devolution. We have another similar entity in the coast, and several, they used to be called regional development authorities. If you had to do away with them, you would do a lot of savings. We have other parastatus which no longer add any value to our country. This country, the last time I checked, because I was a member of Public Investments Committee of the National Assembly, had about 360 state corporations. If you can move that number to about 200, you would save a lot of money. A good example is the way we did, we merged corporations in the agriculture sector into one giant corporation. Of course, there are complaint that was not a very good decision, particularly in the tea sector. But be that as it may, if we are able to merge those several corporations into one entity, I'm sure in other sectors we can be able to come up with giant entities. And by doing that, you save a lot of money. Once you save, you now go back and tell IMF, look, I've been able to do this. I've been able to do this one. So therefore, you don't have to force me to levy VAT on petroleum products.
Indimuli, the rule of economics demand that you do not overtax the current generation for the comfort of the future generation, or you do not give lavish life now, which shall hence be paid by the future generation. So you have to come up with a balance. And what we are doing now is paying debts that were taken the last 6, 7, 4, 5 years ago, which ought not to have happened. But let's face the facts here. World Bank are interested in 71 billion shillings annually. Now, we have seen several reports, including that from the Auditor General, that this country loses between 400 to 600 billion shillings annually to corruption. If we tighten belts a little bit as regards fight against corruption, then we are more. I mean, 5, 6 times over If we can, well, I know you can't close all the loopholes to corruption. You can't seal all of them. But at least you can reduce it to a level that will hence be beneficial to IMF. Because one of the issues that they have lined up for attention is fight against corruption. And therefore you may ask yourself, now that we are waking up to the reality on IMF, is the fight against corruption that is happening now out of Uhuru Kenyatta's personal conviction? Or is it a smokescreen to, hoodwink financial institutions abroad to extend loan facilities?
Wow.
We must therefore be quite decisive. If we are fighting corruption in order to seal all the loopholes and channel our funds prudently in ways that will address the plight of the Kenyan people, then let it be done. Okay. But if we are doing it for, aggrandizement of the international community and others, then we are losing the mark.
So the big question now is how much time President Uhuru Kenyatta has, because some of these things like fighting corruption appear more like long-term solutions. Right now he is staring at a finance bill with amendments that if his signature, either way, his signature or lack of it, would have implications both on the common mwananchi and on Kenya's debt portfolio as well.